After studying this module, we shall be able to learn the meaning of marketing research process, understand the research process as a series of sequential steps, learn the nuances of each stage of the research process from the practitioner's viewpoint.
The research process is a series of sequential research activities carried out with a predetermined objective. It involves identifying a management problem or opportunity, translating the problem or opportunity into a research problem, collecting and analyzing information, and reporting the findings as specified by the research problem. These activities are identified and laid out by different scholars and accommodations in different number of steps. But it is important to note that the prescribed categorization by all of them is comprehensive and exhaustive. Further, it is not necessary that every research process will follow the prescribed scheme and order of conduct. The research process is designed in the light of research objectives, the availability of resources and information, the presence or absence of MIS, and the constraints of time and cost. Many a times during the conduct of research, the changing situations or emergence of certain research results lead the researchers to review and revise their research design and regress back or miss certain research steps to move in later steps.
The broadest classification of the research process is a managerial perspective wherein the research is planned, implemented, and finally presented to guide decision making. These major steps in the research process are further subclassified as planning the study or research project, data collection and analysis, and finally interpretation and presentation. The first step, that is planning the study or research project, involves the following steps. Define the problem, that can be both management and research problem. Specify the information needed and research design. Identify the source of information. And finally, decide the techniques of data collection. Data collection and analysis includes designing and drafting research instrument, sampling process and selection, data preparation, processing and analysis. And the last step is interpretation and presentation. It includes interpretation of results and implication of results and report presentation. A much simplified version of the research process presented by Kotler, Keller, Koshi and Jha is observed to be simple to understand and practice. It incorporates 6 steps that are presented as define the problem, the decision alternatives and the research objectives, develop the research plan, organize and carry out the research work, analyze the information, report and present the research findings, make the decision.
Define the problem, the decision alternatives, and the research objectives. This is the initiation of the research study requiring the definition of the managerial problem, conversion of the managerial problem into a research problem, listing down the decision alternatives, and finally identification of the research objectives or purpose of the study in a sequential manner. An illustrative case may help understanding the essence of this step. Choice of a media among the 3 alternatives, print, radio and TV, for the advertising campaign may be defined as a managerial problem by the marketing manager. A consultation with the marketing research consultant may lead the research problem to be defined as checking out 1. The average reach of each media type in the defined target market, and 2. The impact of the campaign by each media type over the buying pattern of the target customer. The decision alternatives may be the selection of one of the media for the advertisement campaign on the basis of maximization of the net returns, that is net of cost and the impact in monetary terms. Finally, the research objective is to help find the media type that has got the maximum net returns. This step incorporates laying down the necessary hypotheses that are to be tested to seek answers to specific questions pertaining to the research problem. This is one of the most important tasks as the designing and conduct of the research is based upon the clear definition of the business and the research problem. In fact, one of the most common sources of error is a poorly conceived research objective and hence a poor research design. The best way in that case may be to put the research objectives in the written form. Both the researcher and the manager are to be involved in identifying and laying down the objectives in a proper, precise, and explicit manner, which once approved serve as the researcher's guide. However, much of the responsibility for specifying the research objectives lies with the marketing manager. In addition, the managerial or the research problem should neither be defined very narrowly nor very broadly, as it would lead to inadequacy or excess of data. Focus should be laid on spelling out the explicit definition of the problem, as it would lead to explicit answers to the queries of what, when, why, and how.
Defining the research problem is important in selecting the research type. In short, three possible categories of problems exist in relation to the research types. These are: if a potential opportunity stimulates the need for research, the most appropriate course of action is to take up an exploratory study. If an apparent problem is to be described, the use of an exploratory research is prescribed to outline the possible causes and explanations along with the conclusive research after the array of hypotheses have been set up. And if the need is to choose between specific alternatives, conclusive research designs with the help of experimentation, more structured and statistically oriented studies may be appropriate. Developing the research plan is primarily the planning phase wherein the research design is laid out. Marketing research design is the specification of the procedures for collecting and analyzing the data necessary to help identify or react to a problem or opportunity, such that the difference between the cost of obtaining various levels of accuracy and the expected value of the information associated with each level of accuracy is maximized. Research plan incorporates a number of decisions regarding the conduct of research. These are: listing needed information, data source and designing the data collection project, drawing a sampling plan, determining the sample size, deciding the contact methods. The next step is listing the needed information. The needed information for the research depends upon the objective of the research and the situation leading to the research request. This may be listed as: if the research is concerned with a potential opportunity or an apparent problem where the exploratory study is more suitable, the list is stated in a general way. Information items are stated in general terms without any linkage with a specific product or promotion idea, and free flow of ideas is encouraged. If the company is about to develop a marketing plan for some product or service, the conclusive study may be more suitable type. The list of information is more specific, is tailor-made to tap the requisite information, and detailed so as to have the in-depth idea about the reaction of the target market. If the choice between two alternatives is to be made, for which specific information is required through past experiences, and experimentation may be used for assimilating such information. Data source and designing the data collection project. Data sourcing. There are two broad sources for collecting marketing research data. These are primary source and secondary source. The data collected through primary sources is called primary data, while the data collected through secondary sources is termed as secondary data. Primary data source. The primary data sources provide the data meant for the current research purposes, and hence it is more valid and useful. But it requires greater time and cost allocations. Secondary data source. The secondary data sources provide data which has been gathered for a similar or different purpose by some other research agency. Such data may be useful for the current investigation. It must be used with necessary precautions of checking its timings, reliability, validity, completeness, adequacy, internal consistency, and accuracy. The secondary data resource is less time and cost consuming and is most frequently used. Usually, a marketing research requires a combination of primary and secondary data in various proportions depending upon the nature, purpose, and significance of the research. The designing of data collection project can be taken up in the following manner. Designing the overall project. First step. After determining the research objective and listing the needed information, next step is to check if the required information is already available in company records or outside secondary sources. Second step. After reviewing the secondary sources, examine carefully if available data fits the need of the research, that is, its adequacy, the purpose for which it was collected, the definitions used for various concepts, the time when it was collected, internal consistency of the data, and its reliability. Third step. If needed information is not available, field or primary data needs to be collected. This requires addressing many important issues regarding research instrument and design that can take alternate forms or a combination of different forms.
The choice seek answer to the following question. Should a census study of the whole population be conducted or a sample study should be taken up? Who should be interviewed and how? Interviewing requires the survey approach wherein the beliefs, preferences, knowledge and attitude of the respondents are noted with the help of a questionnaire. This approach is more suitable for a descriptive study. The questionnaire consists of a series of questions pertaining to the research subject and asked in a logical, meaningful and different manners. The key question is to identify the population and the sample frame from whom the needed information will be captured. How should the behavior be observed? The unspoken behavior and attitudes may be captured through observation method. This is a systematic process wherein the researcher or the observer uses specific guidelines to observe and record behaviors, experiences and attitudes of persons as they happen in real setting. No communication, questioning or interaction takes place and the observer may use some devices, gadgets, internet records, cameras, checkout scanners, etc. for effective record and retrieval of data. Physical, verbal, expressive behavior and temporal patterns can be effectively captured by the observation method. How should the case study method be conducted is another query. The researcher faces the question whether an extensive study of few cases should be made to draw meaningful comparisons, differences and generalizations, or a large number of cases for select variables are to be used. The case study is yet another approach wherein a large number of cases is required for a conclusive study, and if a researcher is concerned with finding the best way or choice of alternatives, few selected case studies may be conducted for the purpose. Another issue is how should the information regarding customers' attitude and opinion be gathered. The attitude, perception and opinion of the customers are best captured by the qualitative measure of data collection. These are loosely structured techniques of data collection that offer more creativity and flexibility both to the researcher and respondents in expressing and noting the responses. Major techniques in this category are word association, projective techniques, laddering, brand personification and visualization. Another query is how will the experiments be incorporated in the research? The most scientific and valid approach to conduct a research is the experimental research. This requires a decision about form of experimental variables, method and type of its application, that is the experimental design, the selection of the control group and the experimental group and their application, and also recording and testing the significance of responses.
The next step is drawing a sampling plan. The sampling plan incorporates the decisions about the following aspects. Population. It is the entire group under study as specified by the research objectives. They are the respondents who can provide the needed information. Sample frame. It is developing a list of population so that everyone in the population has an equal chance of being selected. It is a master list of all the sample units in the population. Methods to select respondents. The alternatives available to select the respondents out of population are probability sampling and non-probability sampling. Probability sampling includes methods like random sampling, systematic sampling, cluster sampling, and stratified sampling, where the respondents has equal chance of being selected in the sample. Non-probability sampling is used when the item to be selected has a known probability of being selected. It includes methods like convenience sampling, judgment sampling, referral sampling, and quota sampling. Sampling unit. It determines the basis for drawing a sample. For example, individual, city, block, specific customer segments identified by a character, etc. Sample plan. It is a method developed for selecting and contacting the sample members.
Determining the sample size. The answer sought is to decide how large the sample should be. That is, how many number of items in the population are to be surveyed. This decision depends on many factors like the problem at hand, the budget, the level of accuracy needed, the level of confidence in interpreting the results, and the chances of error allowed in concluding the true state of affair. The decision regarding sample size is guided with certain axioms that are presented as follows. The size of the sample has nothing to do with its representativeness, but the sample size affects the sample accuracy. A probability sample will always have some inaccuracy, and the 10% accuracy is possible in case of a census study only. But it is almost always infeasible because of cost and practical reasons. The larger the size of the sample and the less is its sample error. The greater is the variability evident in the responses, the larger should be the sample size. With few exceptions, the accuracy of a probability sample is independent of the size of population. That is, the sample size and the size of the population are not related to each other. Therefore, a probability sample size can be a very tiny percent of the population size and it still can be very accurate with little sample error. However, non-scientific approaches regarding the sample size determination should be avoided. Thus, determining the sample size on the basis of conventional practices or the percent rule of the thumb approach or the cost basis of affordability or the statistical analysis requirement approach, even though are simple and easy to apply, but are neither efficient nor economical.
Deciding the contact methods. The next planning aspect is to decide the method of contacting the respondents. The options available are as follows. Mailing questionnaire. A cost-efficient method where the interviewer's bias or distortion is controlled and a very large number of respondents can be approached. The downside is a very low response rate. Telephonic interview. This is a quick and cost-effective method of gathering information with better response rate than mail method, as the respondents can get clarifications of questions. However, this kind of a contact should be short and impersonal to be effective, along with the availability of good infrastructure for telecommunications. Personal interview. It's the most effective type of contact as it is bilateral and provides ample scope of improvisation as per the need of the situation. However, the highest level of associated cost and biasness or prejudice of the interviewer's observation may dilute the effectiveness of this method. Online interview. conducting a chat, online focus groups, questionnaires sent through emails, or questionnaires embedded on the web are a few of the alternatives where a respondent is contacted online. This approach can be cost effective and time saving with good response rate if the respondents are sent regular reminders. Organizing and carrying out the field work. Implementation of the research design is the next phase of research process that ensures the conduct of research as per the plan. However, this phase is the most challenging one as it involves the maximum of cost and risk of errors. Hence, the value of research drawn is most sensitive to this phase. The major tasks in this step can be categorized as selecting, training, controlling, and evaluating the field workers, deciding the research methodology and methods of collecting data, processing the completed data forms in a way that will yield the information which the project was designed to obtain. The steps involved in data processing are scrutinizing and editing the forms, preparing the data for tabulation, categorizing and coding the data, preparing the data sheet in computer software with required categorization and codification, data entry in the data sheet, establishing the procedures which transform the raw data in the computer software into hypothesized variables, compiling the tables of data to calculate percentages, averages, and other parameters to inquire the hypothesized measurements, making comparisons for different classes, categories, and groups to check the hypothesized relationships, and observing the research findings and results. Let us discuss the major problems and errors in fieldwork. These are very low response rate, adding up to the cost of fieldwork, lack of cooperation by respondents in giving correct and consistent response, dishonesty, incapacity, or biasness in response by respondents, dishonesty, incapacity, or biasness in the recording and interpretation of response by the interviewer, invalid or unreliable research instrument, human errors in data entry or processing, inappropriate sample selection or sampling procedure, sample size being too small to render significant and generalizable results.
The next step is analysis of the data. Data are useful only after the analysis. It is the analysis that assigns meaning to the data result. Data analysis involves converting a series of recorded, coded, and processed information into descriptive statements and or inferences about relationships expressed in the form of hypotheses at the earlier stages. Application of a number of statistical and mathematical techniques and decision models result in measurement or the presence or absence of relationships or attributes in the hypothesized variables in the hypothesized manner. This leads to the acceptance or the rejection of the hypothesis and hence the conclusions and findings of the research. It is imperative to select the most suitable and valid technique for data analysis as it lays the foundation of the research study. Further, the correct interpretation of the observed results is very important. The results are mere facts and numbers. Language and meaning to these is to be provided by the interpreter only. It is important that the results are interpreted in the light of the research objectives. An independent explanation of results will not render the value that is expected in case of objective-oriented explanation of results. Thus, the end results should contain the information that coincides with the hypothesis and the list of needed information at the earlier stages.
The next step is reporting and presentation of the research findings. This forms the end product of the research process. The importance of the reporting can be simply understood by the fact that a poorly reported research findings can lead to the project being labeled as a failure irrespective of its good quality. The type and nature of this report largely depends on the nature of the project, the objective of the research, and the audience for which it is being prepared. The report may be descriptive, including the details of the management problem and research objectives, research methodology, as well as the data collection processes and results. At times, it may focus more over the presentation of the primary conclusions that form the key interest area for the management. Many a times, the written research report is accompanied by the oral presentation to the target audience. Irrespective of the form of reporting and presentation, the key characteristics is that the reporting should serve the purpose of the research, that is, aiding the management in decision making. The following points can add to the reporting and presentation value. Background. It's a statement of the management problem along with the factors and the context that influence it. Role of research. To make the executives understand the role of research in filling the gap between the information sought and information available so as to justify the cost of research and its value. Objectives. It's a description of the research objectives that have guided the research project and how these objectives are relevant to the management problem. It also includes a statement of the value of the information. Executive summary. It's a brief statement of the summary of each of the research phase so that the executives develop a basic understanding of the research study without going entirely through it. Research approach. It's a non-technical description of the data collection methods, measurement instrument, sample, and analytical techniques. Findings and conclusions. This section is a key area of interest for the management and therefore focus should be laid on relating the management problem with the research findings in an explicit and conclusive manner. Technical appendixes. The statistical or technical or detailed information in which only few of the potential readers may be interested. And the last step is to make the decisions. The marketing research that is carried out with a predetermined objective is a means to reach the end. It provides the useful insight, but the efforts are not significant until necessary decisions are taken with greater precision and more confidence. The information provided by the researchers in their report may be used by the managers in different ways depending upon its significance, utility, and criticality. The alternate actions taken up by the executives can be as follows. Improvise the decisions by using the added information. Discard the information if the results are not consistent or reliable or do not indicate significant differences. If the exploratory research results hint towards useful conclusive insights, carry out further research after drawing and testing hypotheses. Retain and preserve the research findings and conclusions for future references and use.
The marketing research process is a series of activities performed with a predetermined objective. These activities are planned and organized with a managerial perspective so that the implementation of the research process is carried out effectively to achieve the laid out objectives. The presentation of the series of research steps has been taken up by the scholars differently, but the core steps and their essence remain the same. The steps are 1. Define the problem, the decision alternatives, and the research objectives. This means that translating the managerial problem into clearly defined and time and cost specific research objectives to help management select the best alternative. The second step is develop the research plan. This involves taking the number of decisions regarding listing of needed information, deciding the data source and designing the data collection project, decision about the sampling plan, decision about the sample size, and choice of the contact methods. The third step is organize and carry out the research work. This means implementation of the research design in the form of actual field work wherein the respondents' response is captured, recorded, coded and tabulated for further processing and finding results. The next step is analyze the information. This involves application of statistical techniques and decision models to observe the results and draw useful inferences and conclusions in the light of research objectives. The fifth objective is report and present the research findings. This means summary of the research proceedings in the form of research report and presentation. Finally, taking the decision is the final step. This involves use of the research conclusions and findings to make better and well-informed decisions.